Welcome, everybody, to the next Zoom meet. And good to see this number of folks here. We got Chris with us, as you know, and he's got some, as you can imagine, some very cool images to share with all the work that his team has been doing. It's just off the charts. So without any further ado, I would like to turn this over to Mr. Chris Gerlach.
Hi guys, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed associating with you all. We started this project 8 years ago with basically just research. Um, I got involved in simming and railroad simming. I've always been interested in railroad history, but I had not much of operations back in 2003, and in my recovery time, I discovered computer games and sims. So I started out with train sim back then, and since then I've gained the skills to be able to make models for them. And I've always loved history, and the Civil War has been one of my interests as well as railroading. So I will start with share screen. This one. Everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
That's the first image that I ever saw of City Point, and it just intrigued the heck out of me. I had no idea what it was or what it was about, but I started researching it, and uh, we had a chance. I had a chance to get together with a bunch of guys who were similarly interested, and so we started the project we're working on now to build the 18-mile military railroad that ran from City Point to the siege lines at Petersburg. And we were very fortunate to have some assistance to get to get some maps that were done by the U.S. Army that portrayed the base at City Point and also the entire railroad line that went all the way to one side to the other. On the arrow, there it is. The yard that they built was built to bring supplies down from the north. The army itself, 160,000 men of the Army of the Potomac, crossed the river, the James River, to the west of this and came over to City Point because it was one of the easiest access points to get to Petersburg, which was the only way for supplies to still get to Richmond at the end of the war. And so it became the last and longest battle of the war. The railroad itself was organized around supply. They brought all the equipment down on barges that were, the system was developed by General Haupt. And all these cars were brought down from the north. They didn't last very long. Boxcars wore out pretty quickly back then. But this were the two main types that they had on that military line with boxcars and the flat cars. They called platform cars back then, some of them. And we modeled everything in these images slowly. This is one of the maps that we were actually given by one of the members of your group, our group, Weigel, Mike Weigel, and he found this in a university collection in Virginia. This is a actual map plan done by the U.S. Army at the end of the war, showing all the buildings at City Point. They built them with very well-organized construction gangs, mostly freed slaves that they fed and housed. This was the housing for the workers right here. All along the line here were the warehouses for supplies that they brought in. They built a large engine house and a car shed, and over here was the arsenal for all the military supplies. And so we modeled everything here, and started with this as the beginning of our work on the project. This is the overall military line. It went from City Point over to the Globe Tavern, which was on the Weldon Railway. And this is Petersburg here. Petersburg was the center of 4 railways. The Weldon came up from the south. The Norfolk came up also from the more easterly. The Richmond and Petersburg came from the north, and the south side came from the southwest. And so this intrigued us, not only the military line, but also the railroad activity at Petersburg. So we've modeled the military line as far as the Pitkin Junction, which is about here. We still have 9 miles to go, some very major trestles. But when we got here, we made our decision to focus on Petersburg, and that was 2 years ago. It took us quite a long time to get that far, and our team has a number of people. One of the guys that works with us is an amazing photographer, but also loves the history, and he developed a system of using the maps I showed you to lay out on top of the landscape. The land is actually made from USGS projections, so it's accurate. He put down the map, and then we built the models and placed them exactly on the map. So that's how this was done. And this is what it looks like once they're created.
Crazy cool. Crazy cool.
So once the land is created digitally, then Steve, our roadmaster and landscape guy, does all the texturing. And the textures are photographic textures, some from Google Earth, of the actual land. And the colors we modeled from sources. We used Google Street a lot. The great source of stuff. And this is what it looks like.
Wow.
So this is the overall City Point base. This is the engine house in the middle, car shop, all those warps along the water, and housing for the workers. There were camps all over. The area was pretty heavily defended in case the Confederates tried to get that far, which they never did. This over here at the end of the point was it was a small town with a large mansion out on the point. It had been a small shipping port for shipping tobacco to Europe before the war. And these are all ships that brought in. They had over 200 ships a day sometimes bringing in supplies. The schooners were used a lot for military supplies because they didn't have fire on board, so they could bring gunpowder in safely. But this was one of the barges that was used for carrying railroad cars. We modeled all the ships. The ships will be animated and on tracks of their own, so in other words, they'll move. And we have naval ships. There's some armored clads out here. And we will be having some active work with them. But the railroad simulation runs trains on these tracks in as accurate a method as possible.
Was that a pile driver?
Yes. They had 2 of them there, and they operated and drove all the piles for the wharfs.
Wow.
Do you have a photo of them by any chance?
Yes. I can get you a copy if you like.
That's the next
Okay.
question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, and I can show you detailed pictures of our models too, if that'll help. And so this is the first stage of construction. This is pretty early on. No foliage in, just getting all the buildings in the right place, getting the tracks to work right. These are all the shops that they had. And this was the Arsenal Wharf out here. And so as we developed it, this is what it looks like now. And the trains when the route is operational, people will be able to operate the trains on their timetables that they had. We've been able to get copies of their daily timetables and their rule book, so we know how the train orders were written. They had a telegraph line along the line, but that was the only control they had. So this is just an early overhead shot, early in development. But we detailed it. Go ahead.
On that photo you were just at, the one before this one,
Yeah.
I had assumed the barges would be at the end of those 3 lines going out there, but you got wharf out there. Where did the barges bring train cars in, or did they?
I'll show you. They did. Their wharf was up here. Here it is. There's the gate right there.
Ah, okay.
That's the lift gate. And there was a line that ran straight to it. And they had water tanks right there too, because the engines would be brought down with empty tenders and boilers. And so they would have to water them and fuel them up. And they had a big fuel duct right here. where all the wood was, put on the engines. So they had interesting water system. They had these tanks here, but they had water pumps down at the water that they pumped up with small portable steam engines. Some of the buildings we've detailed the interiors, so the engine shop has all the working, all the tools and workbenches, and inspection pits underneath the tracks. And there's a working turntable that operates in the model that the military railroad built. This is the beginning of the construction of the line south of City Point. Just basically how Steve makes the landscape, gets the shape right, starts putting in the rivers. This was our first bridge we made. And this is the harbor part of City Point in full operation. We try to model it up with all the daily activities as possible, so people can get a real sense of what life is like. So it's not just a train simulation. Now, this is a very unusual painting that was done during the war and exhibited widely around the East Coast as a traveling exhibit. And it's of City Point. This is the camps on top of the hill, that mansion at the very end of the point, Appomattox Manor. And the details in this are incredible. We've been able to confirm the stuff that the artist put in here, he must have been there himself to see. He has a locomotive here, a boxcar. These are flat cars with ordnance on them. The ships are all accurately modeled. We can identify some of the ships. So he was a very interesting artist.
E.L. Henry was there during the war.
Yeah, quite a remarkable man. I was very impressed by his work. I don't know much about him, but was a remarkable painting. And this is a detail that shows this boxcar I was talking to Tom about before. We discovered the boxcar had a paint scheme similar to some that were used on the South Side Railroad, and also the Weldon. Both had wheat-colored cars. And so these are all the supply wagons. This was the military standard, what were called escort wagons, that could carry about 1,000 pounds of supplies. And they were the ubiquitous moving the truck of that era. So we modeled all that too. This is some of the soldiers that we've made. We used actual uniforms for the textures on these. We found original uniforms in collections, and so we made the textures for the figures from those. And this is one of Tim Muir's locomotives that John Ott has helped with wonderfully. Thank you, John, so much for helping Tim so much. You've been a real blessing to him. Because as you all know, there are very few, if any, plans of the locomotives back then. So this is an overview of City Point as it's built out. So this is, the stages in our development. Eventually we will work on some of the landscape in the distance, but we're got other things we're working on now. This is a view from the town there. Again, daily life subjects we've tried to include. The women's costumes are from actual authentic originals. The horses, we had to do all the horse equipment and learn about all that. There was a lot of technology we had to learn. This is one of Tim's beautiful locomotives. It's the May Queen, and really a beautiful locomotive he's made. He's worked very hard to get them as accurate as possible. All the drive works accurately, is animated fully. Have accurate steam sounds, and in the sim you can drive the locomotives either from the cab, or you can ride behind in a passenger car, or you can free roam with the camera. So you can do a number of things, and I'll do a quick demonstration of how the route actually works.
Cool.
But the detail he put into this is incredible. He did the very best he could to, follow all the records we have, and his work is just astounding. And
Question, Chris.
yes.
Maybe for John too. John, did you provide the colors, the structures? What was your involvement?
This particular locomotive is mostly Tim's. We discussed it several times, but a lot of the color choices are his. but they're accurate. I'll vouch for their accuracy.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much, John. It's meant a lot because with a lot of this work, we're blind. You know, we're doing the best we can with what we can figure out, and so it's kind of a long detective work. This is how Tim works on his models. This is his modeling program, which I also use. So he lays out these very detailed plans and builds to the plan. And so this is one of his locomotives in process. I don't know which one it is. He also we worked at developing passenger cars and all this different rolling stock. But this is it shows the gear process, and it's incredibly difficult. This is an old modeling program to see what you're working on when you have all these parts there. Uh, I think he's burned out his eyes.
And you have brass on the front and back of those cylinders?
Yep.
Wow, okay.
As far as I know, there's indications that that's how it was done, but I'm not the expert in that side of things.
Yeah, these are some of the things we talked about.
Yeah, I remember a couple of sessions ago we were talking about, but anyways, we were seeing it. Okay.
I forget most of what we talk about. That's why I keep going back to the videos.
Well, that stuff is beyond my pay grade. I'm the other side of things. This is one of his beautiful boxcars. I really respect how he's developed the weathering and the texturing. You can see the chalk marks that the guys on the line would make
Love
to
it.
indicate what was in the car and the destination point.
I never saw a number on a truck before.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Tim is definitely a detail guy. All the doors work, and all these cars have multiple loads, so you can actually design any kind of load you want. This is the first locomotive he made, and it took him a year, and I can see why looking at it. It's really beautiful, and I think this is one of the things that John, you worked with on him for the tender.
Right.
Really beautiful design. Very handsome locomotive. It originally was the General Haupt, and then it was renamed. And it's
Robinson.
Robinson. Okay, that's my understanding. And one of the flat cars, Tim was able to find an original flour sack from the Civil War. So these are made from that.
Love it. Love it.
And that's another one of his locomotives. And showing some of the scenery that we've developed. But I find the locomotives just incredible to work with. We also had to develop a rolling stock for the Southern railroads, and that was very hard to do. There's very few images, almost no images of passenger cars. I think of 3 or 4, and but we were able to get information on the color scheme, so we know that they used white with red trim, and this is Tim's evocation of that. Does it look okay to you guys? Does that look reasonable?
I wouldn't know. I was shocked to see that the car was painted white. John, what do you think?
Really unusual, but I can believe it.
And those vents on the top, you have 2 bathrooms and then the wood burning stove, or what's?
Yeah, a stove at one end.
Stove at one end. Those other 2 are ventilators.
Yeah, they didn't have bathrooms on them.
Okay.
There probably are kerosene lamps underneath the ventilators.
Ah,
I bet that's right. There is an
And,
interior of the car.
It might be a little creamier than that, the color,
With the white? Okay.
but that
Oh,
looks great. That looks great.
we're wide open to input. None of us are trying to be know-it-alls. This is one of the South Side Railroad cars that we actually made using a photograph. I'll show you a little later. did the best we could with that because again, there's very little information. And this is the test run of the Robinson.
That's
And
the
earlier-
Beckwith.
Pardon?
I'll say that's the Beckwith,
That's the Beckwith. Yeah, sorry.
General Beckwith, or
Um,
Colonel Beckwith, I'm sorry.
yeah, there's several versions of it. Tim would redo things. He'd start with something and add to it as he learned more. But the sim actually produces a quite realistic smoke, which is a nice thing to have. It's not an easy thing to do. Actually, I go ahead.
Sorry, Chris. I was under, I don't know, probably the mythology, and maybe John or somebody can confirm this. I thought wood burned white and coal burned black, or not necessarily.
Wood tends to be a whiter smoke colored, and oil and coal tends to be blacker. Most people won't know the difference, though.
Well, I designed the smoke texture so we can change it.
And we talked about it before, but I can't remember when did things switch over roughly from wood to coal.
After the wars.
Yeah, these would all be wood burners.
Okay.
Yeah. This is
Depended
along,
on the road, but as far as I know, the military railroad all used wood.
this is along the military railroad toward Petersburg at cedar level, and this is how the army supplies were shipped. Pork and beef were in barrels, pickled barrels usually, and hardtack were in these wooden boxes. Every soldier was guaranteed a certain daily diet of hardtack and some meat usually. Also, they shipped flour in barrels, other things, but that's how they would move the supplies, and that's why the railroad was so important to move these up there. Feeding 160,000 people a day wasn't an easy job.
Not to mention the
So
horses.
these are the oh god, the horses, yeah, 70,000 horses. So they these are the stations along the military railroad from an illustration in Harper's Magazine, and we're making all of them as we go along. We've made five of them. Along the route, we've got farms and local scenery as accurate as possible. And that was interesting, learning about what farms looked like in the 1860s and trying to get that right. So now we're in Petersburg. This is the city of Petersburg. It was 15,000 people during the war. About 9,000 of them were whites, and the rest were colored Negroes and slaves mostly. And it was an industrial city. Had 5 iron foundries, 25 large cotton, tobacco, flour mills, plenty of manufacturing, 3 large brickyards. They made uniforms from the army, ordnance. There were a couple people in Petersburg that manufactured locomotives. Hosea Wells was a remarkable man in Petersburg who had a foundry and made, we believe, around 25 locomotives. We found a very interesting early article from that time about him. He started out making wagons. He made Conestoga wagons, big freight wagons, and the story was in Petersburg, if you had a Wells wagon, you never had to fix it. His work was very well known. So this is a photograph of the city, and it was our goal to build the city as accurately as possible.
What's
This
in the
is a
lower
picture.
left?
Lower left is
Yeah,
here.
that stuff. What is that?
That's farm supplies. I think it looks like, I'm not sure what that is, but there were farms here, farm fields.
Uh-huh.
There's a better photograph we'll see in a minute, a little farther
Okay.
along. This is Petersburg, just at the end of the war. These are the South Side machine shops, and this is the city as it was. They used green, lead, and tin tiles for the roofing, mostly, and brick. They had a very large brick clay deposit on the other side of town, which is still active. It's huge. It's like a giant pit. So they had lots of brick. And this is one of the, we used photographs and any kind of sources we could find. This is a pretty well-known photograph of the Federal Army entering Petersburg. Actually, they're leaving it in this picture, but this is one of the main roads going into Petersburg, Washington Avenue. And this is, we would work identifying the buildings in these photographs and modeling them. And the way that we worked around this, the Army made a map, a very detailed set of maps under Colonel Mitchler of the entire region. And they were very, very careful draftsmen. So this shows the location and the size of every building in Petersburg in 1865. It's mostly accurate. We found a couple mistakes. This is the gas plant right here, and the way they have it laid out was incorrect. But we only know that because we have photographs. So they did a pretty good job overall. This is the Weldon Petersburg line. This is their roundhouse right here, and their major car shed. Their line came into town. Their station was here. We have no images or pictures of any of the railway stations in Petersburg, so I had to really work hard to do the best I could. It's not easy. But I'll show you what we've done so far, and comments are very welcome. Up here is the Richmond and Petersburg Depot station. It was a very long one with multiple tracks leading into it. And then the Norfolk and Atlantic, Norfolk, there's a couple different, the Norfolk Railroad had a station right here, which isn't shown on the map. And this line coming in from here was the South Side Railroad. And this was their main depot right here and a car shed. And over here were the South Side car shops. So we've modeled all the railway facilities. We now have pretty much of this city built, but only very recently. Actually, some went in 2 days ago. But we've been working on this now for a year and a half, because once we reached the edge of, as far as we got with City Point and along the military line, we had to stop because I'm the main model maker, and it took me a year to make about 800 models for the city, which you'll see shortly. This is another set of maps of Petersburg, which we discovered were made in 1870. It was basically a street atlas that was published by a company called ACWRRHS. And there are 4 sets of these maps in existence, 3 here in this country, and 1 in Paris, France. And this is the set in Paris, France, which is digitally available online. And we were very, very fortunate to be able to get copies of it and be able to use these, because you can zoom in, and they have individual property owners on the buildings. It's that detailed. And this is the detail of the Army map showing downtown with this is the Weldon Depot there, the South Side Depot up here. And this is the downtown street network we've been working on. It's not an easy thing to build a city. Kind of crazy too, I guess. But anyway, this shows the area on those detailed maps. And south of town were the large mills along the river. This is the Appomattox River, which was pretty strong flowing, because the channel narrowed here and there were some falls, so the water had a good head of water. They built a canal system which fed into town, and this is the canal line came and ended up right here. And the canal was useful because bringing tobacco to market was not easy. As you may or may not know, tobacco has to cure for a year at the source, and then it's put in special barrels called hogsheads, which weigh about 800 pounds apiece. And it was very hard to ship them in those days. So water was the best way, and the canal system was built for that. And the tobacco would be processed up to a certain point in Petersburg. There were 25 tobacco factories all over town. Some of these big ones you can see here. And then the tobacco, the ships would come from Europe up the river. Ocean-going sailing ships could actually come to Petersburg, to the harbor here. This bridge wasn't there. This bridge was built at the end of the war because before the war, the local cartage trade, in other words, all the wagon companies that did transshipping, had control of the city through the city government, and they refused to allow the railroads to interchange their lines.
Of course.
So during the war, the Confederate Army got totally pissed off about this and said to hell with it, and they built a connection line up here. At the end of the war, when they retreated, they burned the railroad bridge, they burned this bridge, they burned these bridges over to the shops. So when the Union Army came in, they built this bridge here because they wanted to get their rolling stuff up to Richmond as fast as possible. The southern railway lines were on a different gauge, so they had to re-gauge the line, but they built this bridge for that.
So Chris, when the Union soldiers came in, they built that bridge. The other bridge that the Confederates built was already still in place, or did they destroy that?
They burned it.
Okay. The
Yeah,
Pocahontas.
Yeah, next to the Pocahontas Bridge, there was a railroad bridge that connected to Richmond. Because one of the reasons why Petersburg was so important was not only was it supplying Richmond, but that line of rail between Richmond and Petersburg was a key supply line, and General Grant tried to break that line 4 or 5 times, and General Lee would move his army up and down the railroad. And so he was able to defeat the Union Army using the railroad to move his army.
On
And
the bottom right of that picture, the waterworks with that, yeah, a little above that, teeny bit above.
yeah,
Yeah, is that waterwork? Is that a reservoir? Is that the city water for drinking?
the reservoir is here,
Oh, okay.
but this was a lake that they would filter the water from the lake in the reservoir, and they had a steam pumping plant right here. They had running water for the city, and the gas plant supplied gas lighting. So it's a pretty sophisticated city, uh, quite advanced for its time, and quite wealthy. Uh, because the tobacco trade, which would come in from Europe, was very, very lucrative. Uh, so it was quite a powerful community in lots of ways. But the railroads were key for everything. This is a famous panoramic series taken by what's his name, the famous photographer Brady, at the end of the war. And this shows the South Side machine shops over here. This is the downtown area. Uh, the mills are down the river down this way. And so this photograph is all very high resolution glass negatives, and you can get incredible detail out of it. So we've used it to build the city.
This is looking south, right, from the north side of the river.
It's difficult. It's southeast. Um, Petersburg isn't north-south directly, but yeah, it's looking toward the Atlantic Ocean is over this way. So that's the orientation. This is a photograph of the gas plant and the river on the north side of town. And we modeled everything in this as well. We haven't placed all of it yet, but and this is what showed us where the layout of the gas plant actually was. That map showed the buildings on the right side, but actually they're behind it. So that was kind of interesting to find out. This is a woodcut of the retreat of the Confederate Army at the end of the war. They burned a lot of the buildings along the river, and then they burned the bridge because they were trying to slow the Union Army down. This is a wood print of the Union Army marching into Petersburg, and this is eventually became the post office, but it was the custom house where they would bring all the cargo to be weighed before it went on ships to be shipped to Europe. So the bottom part of the building was open, and they would just bring all the big barrels of tobacco and the bales of cotton in there to be weighed and assessed for the taxes. And we built all these buildings, and I'll be able to show you shortly what it looks like in our model. This is one of the few images we have of Petersburg at the time. This was done by Waugh, a pretty famous artist. did wonderful Civil War drawings and paintings. And this is all completely accurate. He was a very skillful draftsman. And we use this. This is the Jarrett's Hotel, which was the largest hotel in Petersburg, a very famous hotel. This was the main building. These were the stables over here, the livery, and where the workers lived upstairs. This is the other side of the street, and these are the Weldon Depot is right behind you. Looking at this image, so the station was right here. Wish I'd
Mm.
done. I wish he'd drawn that also, but he didn't.
Yeah.
But these are some of the conductor cars from the railroad sitting here on the siding.
Do you know what that notation is of his above those cars?
Uh, these are for the churches, and I don't know. It's hard to read.
Got it.
I've been able to figure it out. But we did use that for the buildings. This is a handbook that the Jarrett's Hotel did after the war for tourists that came down to tour the battlefield. And this is how we got an image of the hotel enough to make a good model from. And this was their image of a train. I'm not sure how accurate that is. You guys would know more than I would if that is what trains looked like back then. I'm not sure. Anyway, this is the model I made of the hotel from that drawing and from the
Wow.
brochure.
Extravagant hotel.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. And we try and make the models as accurate as possible. And once the model is made, it goes into the route. This is what it looks like in the sim.
Cool.
So that's the level of detail we can get if you take your time and work at it very hard. We have horse-drawn vehicles. Some of them will move and be animated, but these are figures in period costumes. And this is how we work on our process of developing the layout. One of our team members is a senior architect in a large architectural firm in Chicago. He's an architectural engineer. So he has made elevations like this of important buildings for us. And he can take the historic photographs and actually determine the exact size of things using software and his own knowledge from 50 years of work. So he's been able to give me accurate measurements for the models when we make them. And this is one of the churches that he made. He's also a modeler.
Hmm.
He does beautiful work. It's really remarkable. And this is the roundhouse for the Weldon Railway, which was called the Petersburg Railway, actually, commonly back then. They had a large roundhouse there, marshalling yard. Some of the rolling stock was just taken at the end of the war, so this is what's left. The that railroad had been cut, so it wasn't in operation by the end of the war. But Tim used all these to make models from. You can see stacks for locomotives over here. Here's a tender, flat car, CSA for Confederate States of America. We've found that some cars were labeled that. We really don't know what extent that was or how widespread it was, but it was used for some things.
What's your cursor on there? Looks like frames for our passenger car.
Yes, passenger
Okay.
cars in process that were never completed. And there's quite a deep pit around the turntable. But using this photograph, Paul, our engineer, was able to make the roundhouse.
Hmm.
So we have that. This is how they look when he first makes them. This is in his modeling program. He uses a modeling program which is quite accurate. And this is how it looks placed in the sim. So it's got
Wow.
the tracks in. The building is modeled, textured. And this is what it looks like in the location. I made this. This is a car shed. They used car sheds back then to protect the more expensive rolling stock, like the passenger cars. They would leave them in those. That was some of the railroads had those. This is in Petersburg, one of the surviving buildings from before the Civil War. they used modular housing, a lot of row houses of different kinds. And so I would, this is one of the city streetlights, and I used this photograph to make this model.
Wow.
And when I made these models, I was able to use the photographs to actually do the textures for the windows and the other detail. A lot of the city had cast iron railings because they have all the iron foundries, and the railings were to help keep the animals and stuff away from the buildings,
Right.
because with the horses and the donkeys and everything else. Also, security measure for back then. This is the customs house I was telling you about. It's downtown during the war. There's one of the soldiers guarding it, and this is my model. So it's been our effort to make things as accurately as possible. This is a pretty well-known photograph of Petersburg, of the courthouse, which was one of the first models that was made for us for the project in our process. And this is how they advertised. A lot of the buildings had hand-painted signs on the outside. So if the ownership changed, they could just paint them over and paint a new sign.
That cobblestone?
Yes, the whole city was cobblestoned. Sidewalks, street lights on every corner. It's pretty well done. And this is the buildings modeled, both of those buildings. And I use the buildings to make the actual textures, again, as accurately as possible. And this is what it looks like in the sim. I just completed this setting today.
Nice.
This is the gas plant I was showing about, and the gas plants were very interesting. These are called gas holders. This framework is still there, was still there until about 10 years ago. But the gas was in a collapsible tank, and they would put a weight at the top of water, and the water would create the pressure to pressurize the gas.
Wow.
So these were all buildings that were in the city. This is a very unusual building right here that has a huge cupola built right on top of it. But they were really into cupolas back then, classic style architecture. And for a long time, I didn't want to do it. I finally made that building, and I thought it was so important. But this is what the gaswork looked like on the map I was showing you. And this is my model. So I was able to use those actual existing photographs of the columns to make the textures for that. And that's the layout overall. This is a Southside Depot that was all these wings were for shipping, for freight, and they would just back the wagons up to them and load them up. So it's a trans-shipping facility. Again, it had one of these very attractive cupolas. And this is what it looks like now. Unfortunately, a tornado went through Petersburg and wiped out a lot of the old part of town, including half of the depot.
Wow.
But with magical digital, we restored it. And this is a model by Wayne Campbell, who's an amazing modeler, lives up in Canada. And he does just incredibly beautiful work. Awesome.
I was mentioning to Chris earlier that the sunlight that you got going on there is very, very good. It really pops it, makes it look about as real as you can get on a sim. It's cool.
And there's what it looks like with one of Tim's locomotives.
Yeah, wow, Confederate States, yes.
So he told me that the Lady Davis was kind of a fantasy, and I think he changed the name, but this was in a phase in his process. John would maybe know more about that, but we have the names of a lot of the Southern locomotives, but very, very few images. I mean,
and Lady Davis was a fantasy name, right? There was no locomotive really named that, I don't think, right, John?
It's questionable, but supposedly there was one of the stolen B&O locomotives that was renamed Lady Davis. We talked about that, I think, last meeting.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what, so Tim wasn't sure. And if things are questionable, we try to keep things as solid as we can, but you know, he did a nice job on it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good model of the locomotive that was supposed to have been renamed Lady Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, John. This is the South Side Depot. On the other side of that where we were looking at before. They had a car shed there. These were the tracks laid out. All the railroads back then used these double water tanks. They were pretty standard for both sides. You can see here the hand-hewed ties.
Mhm.
Some of the ties were milled and some were just hand cut.
Right.
And Tim harvested all these boxcars here to make models. And
What?
that's
See, I was one thing that's fascinating for me is when you look at that stub right in the middle there, and uh the rail that's exposed that goes to the right. It looks like it's two straight pieces versus bent. Would they have put straight rail to like make the turn? I guess they would have, right?
I don't know. You guys would know more than I would. But we do have animated step switches on the sim, in the sim.
Dress
I've-
wise, it makes sense to make it straight.
Hmm.
Well, I've also noticed that the switch next to it, it seems to be missing a good portion of the secondary rail. It looks like it's a
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
in front of the box car?
yeah, in front of the boxcar. I mean, it looks like there's a block of wood blocking the boxcar, but also there's a large
Yeah.
piece of missing.
It's missing right
Mhm.
there.
yeah.
Well, they certainly went. They found rail wherever they could back then. They lifted it from a lot of lines.
The South really was hurting for rail and any kind of railroad supply at the end of the war.
Yeah, they were
They
desperate.
ended up cannibalizing a lot of their lines, and they picked up rail from any old siding they could.
So this is our development of the South Side Yard. This is the line that went over to the engine shops, and how we developed something. And this is what the yard laid in and switches in there. Now, the camera, something you'll notice about the photography at that time, things in the distance look a lot closer than they really were. The focal length of those cameras would compress distance. So the physical distance was actually quite a bit farther away than it looked like in the photograph.
Hmm.
So this is how we developed the city. This is the yard laid in. And we had Steve cut the big map into pieces and laid it out on the ground, and he can shrink them down
Jeez.
to expose the underneath or open it up to lay things in exactly where they need to be. And we just started painting in the street pattern in this picture. This was about a month ago. This is how we measure the buildings in the photographs. I worked with Paul to make all these measurements. This is the engine shops from the south side looking across to the city. And we wanted to model all this because it was so interesting. So this is what it looks like. So we built all the buildings. It has a transfer table. This was the engine shops here with all the different bays for them. So the trains would come in, engines would come in onto this platform, which moved back and forth, and they could move in and out of the engine shops that way. This was the machine shop here and the carpenter shop. And Tim has placed down here what we saw in the photographs, which were cars being constructed, construction supplies, waste dump. And
Wow.
this is the city as it was a year ago, when we hadn't had, I was still working on models. And it took me all that time to develop that. This was up the river, up in the Mill District, but this is like in process. I had put this building on the wrong side of the river, so
Hmm.
we had to move it over here because it was hard to tell at first which side of the river it was on. This is how we try and develop detail.
Wow.
This was at one of the big cotton mills, and this was in the middle. This is the weighing house. They would bring the bale when cotton was brought in for the plantation. At each stop along the way, it would be weighed and tested to make sure there was no bad cotton in the middle, and it would be marked on the bale. And each bale would be marked with a marking that authorized it to keep going on the trip. So these are all being processed and ready for shipping to Europe. Is what this photograph is of.
Hey,
And
Chris,
these are
do you have an image or an idea of what the scale looked like?
no,
Okay.
no. We all we know is they had them. I had to make these up, from my imagination.
Yep.
I tried using, other scales from that era. And Tim made these jib boom cranes. That's how they lifted heavy weights in
Right.
situations like that. But Tim makes these great layouts. He's got a real great knack for scenery. So once we develop all the models and everything in, we turn Tim loose and he does all the window dressing. And this is where the city was 2 weeks ago with the street laid out. This was very hard to do. It was not easy. I had to learn texture painting doing all this. So
Wow.
this is a South Side Depot out here and the shops we just looked at. And this is that shot of where it was before, and this is what it looks like now.
Oh my. Look at that.
And that's the city.
Remarkable.
By the Civil War, would they have had that many trees?
Yes. The
Wow.
whole area was very, very heavily wooded. They forested certainly, but around there, trees for air conditioning for that era. Shade was an important part of survival for the hot southern summers. So they did have trees in the city, and we have photographs that show it. Actually, all the streets in the city were lined with trees. Again, to make the roads more weather resistant. And this is another view of the city. And we laid all this out using those maps I showed you. These are some of the warehouses along the river. These are some of the docks where the ships would come in over here. These were transshipment complexes. There's one there. These were the depot. They used covered bridges a lot, which I hadn't realized before this work. For, I guess, to protect the railroad over rivers. I think they're quite attractive myself, but I never realized that was used for railroads that much. So that is the city as it's developing, and there's a view inside the city. This is called Cockade Lane, and all these buildings are still there. So I was able to harvest the buildings for the textures and one of the cobblestone streets. And we will have people and wagons and carriages and stuff on the streets to make them look lived in. And this is the mill district as it's being developed with more of the mills. The mills were very important for the economy, and they were big, very large structures, and they were all driven by water power. Pretty complex cog machinery with belt drive for row on row on row processing machines of different kinds. And also a lot of the work was done by hand as well. This again was a south side. Yes.
I was noticing that you had two kinds of wood. There's like a wall that's, I forget what you call it, but there's no cement or anything. And then there, where the mill is, there's that's cemented in. I noticed another photograph you had earlier. There's both like plain stone and then there was wood fences. I want the wood, if the fence that's there, would that be like one of the first ones when they're just clearing the land and so on, use that fence, and then later when you got more money, then you make your fancy wall?
Well, yeah, because stone walls were usually created by clearing the land for the farms and stuff. As they would move the rocks away, they'd line them up on the side and make walls out of them. So, yeah, I think you're right. Probably the early fences would have been wood. But these walls here were to direct the river water and protect the wheel at times of flood. Tim made these wheels for us and animated them, which is really gonna be nice because they'll turn. And this is
In
more
some of the mills along the Brandywine in Delaware, they actually have, in the bottom part, they actually have doors that open. So when the river's flooding, the water would just flow through the bottom of the building.
That's a good idea.
Hmm.
That's very smart. They also, this is for the canal system that they had. This is the Richmond Canal Basin, but I used it to design ours because there was one in Petersburg we don't have any images of. But they would line the embankments with cut stone. They used canal boats of different sizes. This was sort of the style of canal boat that they used in Petersburg. They wouldn't have had the cabin on there, but they were poled by two men. They were called bateaux, and they were used up until the 1870s for moving cargo. So this is our canal basin with the canal boats.
And the boats were named bateaux?
Bateaux, yes. And the crews were usually freed slaves or escaped slaves. And they were pretty rowdy. They had quite a history, culture of their own, like the canal boatmen from back east, river boatmen. And they were very successful. I mean, they were very necessary for the economy. These boats were all handmade, and they just when they excavated that previous picture I showed you of the basin, it was dried, but it was excavated, and they found a couple of boats at the bottom. So
Oh,
they actually have a real bateau in existence that I was able to use to make the textures for these.
wow.
So these are accurate. And these are some of the hogsheads that carry tobacco and cotton lined up here for processing, for transport. And over here is a boat works, and part of the building is open, so you can actually see in where they were working on stuff. Made the model that way. So this is all this area is to be worked on in the future, but this is where we are right now with the project.
And the
to
people
fin-
pulling the boat could walk along that walk along the side of the front.
exactly.
Yeah, there.
Yeah,
Okay.
there would be one guy at the stern, and one guy would walk up and down what's called the walk board and push it with poles. And we'll finish up with one more of Tim's locomotives. And he does beautiful work. It's been a pleasure to work with him. Remarkable guy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple more. This one doesn't have his cab on. Sorry about that. But,
Double-headed.
yeah, double header. And this is the Richmond and Petersburg depot in Petersburg that I had to figure out what to make, but I did the best I could with it. So that's it for that, gentlemen.
Love the
Wow, thank
detail
you.
on those trucks.
They very detailed. And that's our project as it is so far. Um, and it's been an interesting journey. We've done the best we could with it, and we still have a ways to go. Uh, but it's been an amazing process to learn the history and to try and recreate it.
Yeah, remarkable application of your research, man. It's like the quality of the detail. I mean, not only the detail, but the accuracy, the intentional accuracy you guys have for everything from building placement to the structure of stuff. It's a treasure. Um, so when this goes live and somebody can actually operate it, do you see that like if four fellas wanted to do an operating session with that, they could each take a train and and you could create a schedule with it for the different trains?
The software allows for multiplayer. In other words, multiple people can operate at the same time.
Wow.
And yes, we have it's set up to have a timetable, and you can operate by the timetable, and it'll grade you on your score. And you can carry the cars are designed accurately weight wise. So a loaded car is heavier than a less loaded car. an empty car, and so they go faster or slower on the physics. So the physics of the simulation are amazing. You can drive the locomotives in what's called realistic style. In other words, you have to operate them the way they did, which was pretty complicated. And you just get in and go. You had to fire up the boiler. The engines didn't have brakes. The tenders had the brakes. And the way you worked it with the Johnson bar and all that stuff was very, very complicated. And you can do it that way, or there's a simple drive mode that you just
Good.
push the button and go. It depends on you guys. If you want, I can show you just briefly how the trains operate on the actual sim, but it's up to
Can
you.
I ask you a quick question, Chris?
Yeah.
Now, if there are multiple players, let's say you and I were playing.
Yeah.
My view of what's going on is going to be different than your view, but
Yeah.
my train has to be cognizant of what your train's doing and adhere to the schedule. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's why it's authentic, because it's like real people operating.
Right.
Nice. Very
and-
nice.
Your
And this-
your perspective as a player is out the front window of the cab, correct?
Correct.
Well,
So
actually,
You don't
can-
have the helicopter view. You do.
you can if you want to.
Lateral.
There are 5 different. Well, let me show you real quickly. Just a second. I'll fire it up and show you. It's probably the best way to explain it, because there's a number of different ways you can see things with it. It'll just take me a minute to start it here. I gotta find it right.
And are you gonna have to make water stops and fuel stops and?
If you
Heck
want to,
yeah.
yes. The water tanks all work, and yeah, you can basically you have to also load up with wood, and it burns up, so you have to reload it. So this is the actual sim, and I will start up share screen. There we go. Takes a while to the program starts up. Okay, you're in the engine, and you have different camera views. There's one. This is from a distance. This is inside the cab,
Mm.
and this shows Tim's detail work on the cab.
Oh,
Wow.
The steam gauge actually works. It's pretty incredible.
You could theoretically learn how to run a locomotive with this.
You'd have to know if you want to do it advanced.
Right.
And let me see if I can start it up. Okay, now there's a little pop-up window that you can turn on that shows the engine characteristics. So here you have the reverser forward, the repeater, cylinder cocks, sander, engine brake. So you have to take off the engine brake to start with. The engine brake is off, but the train brake is on. So I have to turn that off. And now, hopefully, purge it and see if I get it to start. I'm not a great driver because I haven't had time to do a lot of it. So you have to switch the Johnson bar to forward and then start.
All right. The file is so big. This is why we see it like a series of photos, right?
Is that just because of Zoom or?
Could be. It might have a low capacity. Wow. So you could see all the different places you can watch your locomotive from. Like Joel said, it could be a little bit of helicopters in the cab on the remarkable.
Yeah, that's more gray, like we're trying instead of black.
And those could, and it looks like you have some shots where somebody could be looking out the side of the cab into the
Yep.
landscape.
So you can really immerse yourself in it if you want to.
Say that again?
You can really feel like you're part of it.
Yeah.
So this is leaving City Point. Over here where the hospital is, this is the bakery where they made all the bread, all the biscuits, and one of the fortifications in the distance.
Wow. So in the simulation, I guess when your locomotive approaches a switch and it's not favoring your way, you got to stop and then walk off the train and throw it.
We know you can use an actual screen will pop up. There's a switch screen that you can open up. It's behind the photograph, and you can turn the switches from the cab.
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to get out and do it manually. So you can go up way up in the air too.
My,
And this is a free roam camera. You can actually go anywhere you want. So that's how it operates.
that's great. I presume that when it's operating, you'll hear the chuff sounds and all that stuff going along with it.
Yep.
Neat.
And there's wildlife sounds and stuff like that. But yeah,
Oh.
the trucks and all the stuff around the train, you'll hear it.
Wow.
So that's how it works.
Period. Railroaders never land.
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of work to make all this happen too. I mean, it's
Right.
just like building a layout, but in a different form. Thousands and thousands of hours. Um, I have no way of counting. I've made over 5,000 models in my modeling career so far. Tim's work takes forever. I mean, like I said, it takes him months to do a locomotive.
Yep.
And we do it because we care about the history and want to help preserve it.
So, Chris, how many? So, I have two questions. One, how many folks are actually on the team that is building this?
Four of us actively and 8 overall. And also, we are now going to be allied with the National Park Service. And there's a group of professional historians and national park people that have formed something called the Petersburg Project. If you guys go online and Google Petersburg Project, they've been working like us on their own for about 8 years. And they have a remarkable series of stuff they've done. We finally have gotten in touch with each other 2 months ago, and they're very interested in our work as we are in theirs, and we're going to work together.
Awesome. And
We'll be giving this project to the Smithsonian, to the National Park Service to use in their historical situations, and to any academic situation that was interested. We may sell it to private users because I've been funding it myself.
Yep.
And we have paid for some of the guys' work because I really value what they're doing, and we want to get the very best as possible.
Yeah. And my follow-up question is, were you all connected in the beginning, or was this kind of some serendipitous thing where people kind of jumped on board along the way?
We knew each other. The 3 people that started it, myself, Steve Thompson, who's the photographer and landscape guy, and Tim Muir. We all are members of a train sim forum called Elvis Tower. It's an online community, been around for about 20 years, of trained people doing sim work who are serious about train history and train operations. So I met them through that. I've known them both for about 10 years, 10 or 12 years. And they're creative, interesting guys. You know, we're all mavericks. We're different, you know. You got to be kind of crazy to do this stuff, I think. You know, whatever.
Yeah, you're with the right group.
So I met you guys. Said, "Wow, this is where people like us." So, I'm sorry I haven't been able to come to more meetings, but I've been working on this stuff. Um, I you get driven. You know, you want to do a good job, and it
Yeah.
takes me about 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours to do each building. And then they have to be processed and tested, and we have to work in the landscape of the route, and we have to work around people's lives and what they're doing, and you know, just like you all work on your stuff. So you know, we're all the same, different form. But it's been a pleasure to be able to share it with you guys. Anything I can help with resources, I will. I'll find the pile driver stuff, and if you'll email me at Chris Gerlach and the number 9 at yahoo.com, that way I can get stuff to you. And then Tom, I'll look for that A-frame lifter jack you talked about.
Oh, yeah. I'll send you an image of that to give you a baseline.
I have a photograph I can find hopefully somewhere.
Well,
Our gigabyte of files is now 64 gigabytes of historical stuff we've assembled. So we have it all online if you want to look. Yeah,
right. Chris,
Now-
awesome. Go ahead.
I have a question about you know, when you're learning on how to do stuff, you make a lot of you wind up making mistakes. So does the simulation if you make a mistake, does it replicate what the actual mistake would cause? Say if you running over a switch, will it derail if it as Tom was asking earlier, if it was lined up improperly?
yes.
Wow.
Trains will derail, trains will crash.
Oh,
Yeah, well, it happens.
right.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
yeah.
including boiler explosions if somebody's not paying attention to the water level.
You know, I don't know. I'll have to ask the guys. I don't know that side of things that well.
Right.
I never even thought about that, but I will ask them. I'll let you know.
Yeah, it as you said, you know, things happen. I mean, and you know,
Because if you run out of water, the train will stop. That's for sure. If you derail, it will stop. So it's that stuff is built in. I'm not sure if we have explosions in it. We will have explosions in our route project for the battle. We'll have the battlefield scenes, and we're gonna have well, the naval ships there'll be a naval battle because the Confederates had a fleet of 5 armorclads they built in Richmond. And in the spring of 1865, they said, to hell with it, we're going to go down and kick the shit out of the Yankees. So they brought their fleet down the river, and they made it to 10 miles away from Petersburg. And the Union Navy went and met them, and there was a battle at a place called Brent's Reach. As far as I know, it was the only fleet naval battle in the Civil War that was inland. I mean, between 2 major ironclad fleets. There were lots of river battles, but this was pretty remarkable. So we will model that and show it.
Wow.
I noticed that little bit of simulation that you just ran, the water level went from the water glass went from 86% to 85%.
Exactly. That's Tim for you. You guys are pretty sharp. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for letting me share. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
It's fabulous.
Yes, thanks for sharing.
That's amazing.
And it'll be available. I'd be happy to share it with you guys when we get to the point where we can. It's exportable. The software that runs it is free. So, you know, you've been part of our process, and we're happy to share.
So you'll be ready for an update and say, February?
Yeah. Well, the city will be
I'm
bigger
kidding.
by then, but you know,
Right, no.
that's what winter is for. Hard work.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for putting all that in and sharing that with us. It was great. Fantastic. God.
Well, I'm going to check out, guys. I'm pretty tired.
Yep.
But I really wanted to
Thank
get
you
this.
so much again.
I wanted to
Thank
show
you.
this to you.
Chris. You.
And please, any questions you have or any input you have, please let me know.
Will do.
Thank you. all.
Adios.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
And I,
So, so when will this be commercially available?
Oh, you're talking at least a year, I think.
Oh, that's all? That's all.
Well, that's why I say at least, it's like they're still building stuff. And yeah, that you got to send them an email. I don't know. That's just my wild guess.
I would say several years, because usually you have a much larger group working on a project like this.
And they've been working on this for many years.
It looks much smoother than it did the last time I saw their operation.
Yep.
But the modeling alone for the buildings is
Yeah.
really, really good. I really enjoyed that. You can get into the space that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's very relatable because it feels so real, and it so heightens the experience of being there because of that level of detail. There was a photo he showed, I think it was the Petersburg yard, where there was those partially constructed passenger cars, and into the left foreground there was a flat car, and it showed its draw head,
end
the
sill
coupler
detail.
pocket. Yeah, that's the first time I saw the end sill have an extension on it and the coupler pocket right in the center of that. I've never seen that kind of setup before. Anyway, it just, there could be some interesting research just on looking at the configuration of coupler pockets on different freight cars.
I think that was an older flat car design.
It was, yeah, okay.
So the joints did not look very strong.
And what's the name of the software this ultimately will be on? Is it, what are the simulator programs called? Train Sim or?
That sounds right, but I don't know for sure.
Trying to remember, I don't think it's Train Sim. I think they have
Yeah.
another.
Yeah, if we go back and look at the earlier video, I think he mentions it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, I vaguely remember that, and I can't remember what he said.
And a couple other times he's been on, I've asked him each time, is it going to be Macintosh friendly? And he said maybe eventually or something, but
Right, maybe eventually. Well, yeah, that's why you got grandkids.
Well, from what I understand, he said that the software that they was using was, I'm not sure if it was open source or free, but that's what my impression is. So it wouldn't be like Train Sim. I think you have to actually that's a paid program. So my assumption is it's one of the whatever. It could be either a train simulator or just a basic simulator also.
For any of you that know about train simulators, I would imagine they're Mac friendly as well, right? But we don't know.
Well, not necessarily, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, usually from what I've seen, the ones that are paid may or may not be friendly, but usually the ones that are open source are. And they also can, if I remember correctly, some of them can also be run on Linux also.
is that a computer?
Yeah, it's a different, Linux is a different operating system.
Oh,
There's, I want to say there's three major ones. You got your Microsoft, and then you got your Mac OS, and then you got Linux. And Linux is much of what a lot of the your server computers you wind up using. They're more of a commercial grade.
At any rate, most of us have trouble with just three-dimensional modeling. Going to this digital stuff. Ah,
I know, and he was talking about,
another lifetime.
yes, when he was talking about you can run the locomotive like a real locomotive, I was thinking I would clearly blow the thing up before I got very far.
That's the whole thing I was looking at. I can imagine it's a lot more challenging if you are looking out the front window of the cab rather than sitting back with this digital thing that magically makes everything work. And you got to pull the Johnson bar back, and you got to blow the horn for the guys to start setting the brakes behind you.
Right.
Because your engine brake isn't going to stop the train.
And then you've got your valves in there too you have to be managing the valves too, right? It's like, my Lord.
And the sight class is really important.
Yeah.
I have run steam locomotives before, so.
Now you know why there's two people in the cab.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, you got the fireman taking care of the boiler and the engineer taking care of the rest.
Right. So the fireman wasn't just throwing wood in the boiler, he was keeping an eye on the gauges.
Right.
Keeping on the gauges, making sure there was enough water in it. He was maintaining the steam boiler like they would do on a normal power plant on a stationary setup or on a steamboat. You know, that's what the job was.
Yeah, he was the computer running the car engine.
That was pretty good of you, Walt, to pick out the water glass. I didn't even notice that.
And what happens if your emergency release valve gets stuck or something? To be able to know the engine enough to know, man, that it should be reading more pressure. It's not reading the right pressure.
Right. I guess you just tip the glass with your finger. I don't know.
Yeah, flick it with the.
Well, it's good that he's making it like, just go forward, go back. Great.
Apparently, those are the only two directions you can go on a railroad.
Sideways.
You can go,
Ideally,
you can go up too.
I've seen some trains that should try to go sideways. It didn't work that well for them.
I have lots of pictures of trains that did that during the Civil War. They don't look to be in really operational condition. Cabs missing.
No more.
I didn't think to ask him. My brother was once on an old steam engine, and the guy who was giving a ride said, "Okay, so come to the station, put on the brakes when you think you need to." And he stopped like a mile past the station. He didn't realize the work it took to get it to stop.
Great.
Right.
Yeah, trains do not stop on a dime. Steel on steel is not very good for stopping. And another thing is that physics is still in play with the full size stuff. This is the smaller stuff, but the values are much larger. I had there was a chance at one time I was working for Sperry Rail Service, and even the vehicle is only 70 tons, but yeah, you could easily wind up just misjudging the spacing or how much momentum even a 70-ton vehicle has. So I can't even imagine what a full-size train with more cars behind it, and also would have even a harder time controlling if you don't know what you're doing.
That's why I like that programming CV, where you can adjust the acceleration and deceleration rate, and I tend to make I like to make it relatively prototypical, and I've seen operators here, put it the throttle down to 0, and the train is still going, although it's slowing down. Before you know it, 3 feet later, it's in the rear end of another train or something else. And they yell, "Tom, it won't stop." It's funny, but you adjust. You know, they adjust to it after a while, because it's fun just to watch them like slow down as opposed to like stop flat or take off gradually. Love the programming on this.
Well, it's going to be a lot more fun if you're looking at that cab window.
Yeah, man, and you see it coming at you.
Yeah, you're going to be thinking about jumping.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things with the live steam locomotives. I mean, you're because the live steam locomotives are much smaller, you have to do both jobs. And it's one, when I was growing up, my father used to belong to an antique gas engine club, and he operated a stationary boiler, which was from the Delaware and Hudson Railway. That was, when they no longer needed it, someone had bought it, and it was on the property when it brought to the property, and it ran. Well, there was 2 steam engines that was connected to it. One was a vertical steam engine, and then a horizontal one. The vertical one they never really used that much because it used a lot of steam oil. So I've only seen it like run once or twice. But the thing is, I mean, it used, I almost want to say it used as much steam oil as it did steam.
No.
Then the horizontal one, which was the one that was normally run, and my father operated during the show that they had when I was younger, and then as I got older, first I was bringing the wood back and forth and all that, but by the time I was in high school, I was actually operating the thing myself. So, and and basically you really cannot let your eyes off the boiler, because next thing you know, all of a sudden, it's like, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, how much water do I got in there? And then you have to realize that the water's below the sight glass, so you have to pump as much as you possibly can into it, and then hopefully that doesn't hurt any of the internals and all that, because you're adding a lot of cold water to a very hot boiler, and all of a sudden that causes that can cause weakness in something, and that can cause a boiler explosion without actually damaging the crown sheet. That's why sometimes you see a locomotive where it's it looks like the front end's blown out and all that because of a crack in the front, not on the crown sheet.
Yes, I've seen that photo. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, it sounds like you've had some experience on a steam, man. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a little.
That was kind of fun back in the day when the New Jersey Museum of Transportation still had steam. That's actually I was a member out there, and John and I used to get to ride the cab, so that was fun because you're a member and you're covered under the insurance. But that was probably real fun back in the day for that, and that's where I got quite an appreciation for high pressure steam boiler safety.
Yeah. I'm going to stop the recording. So if anybody's got to leave, I just want to say good to see you all, and glad you showed up. And it was another, I thought, just a terrific presentation. So I'll see you all later, and stay on. If we can keep talking, I'm in no rush. I'm just going to kick the recording out.
Huh.
Yeah.